This is an exciting time of year, isn't it? I want to talk to you about promises today. If you have your Bible, take it and turn with me to the book of John, chapter 14. John 14. I'll get to that just a minute. I want to talk about promises. Promise is not worth any more than the individual that makes it. I don't know of anything that's more discouraging when a salesman looks you in the eyeball and he says, well, just trust me, just trust me, just trust me. And you carry the battle scars in for 6 or 8 years of payments and what you go on. But communication sometimes is difficult. Yeah, there was an older couple that lived out the edge of town, and they decided that after all that it's time for them to get a divorce. The judge looked down and he asked the man, he said, tell me about your grounds. And he said, it's not very big. We've got 2 acres out here at the side of town, and that's all we've got. And he says, well, do you have a grudge? And the old man kind of scratched his head, and he says, no, we never have really needed one. Said our old pickup's all faded out anyway. We just park it out by the curb. The judge got kind of frustrated with this, and he looked at the woman, and he said, does he beat you up? Oh, no, sir. I get up for him every morning. I have his coffee ready for him. And when he gets up, well, he said, well, ma'am, can you explain to me why it is you feel like you all need to get a divorce? And she says, well, Judge, it's kind of hard to tell you, but just to be honest, said, we kind of have trouble communicating. And so I calculate that judge already had that figured out, don't you? I want us to think about promises today, some promises that Jesus gave us. In John 14, it's one of the last long passages about Jesus and his interaction with the disciples. If you allow me, let me read 11 through 24, and you follow along with me. It says, believe me, Jesus is speaking, believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father's in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves. I tell you the truth. Anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I'm going to the Father, and I'll do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Son may bring glory to the Father. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. If you love me, you'll obey what I command. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you do know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I'll not leave you as orphans. I'll come to you before long. The world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will not realize that I am in the Father. You will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he's the one who loves me. He who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I also will love him and will show myself to him. This is what we could call a pastoral passage, because Christ knows that he's getting ready to leave this earth, and the apostles still, they are not real sure how this is all going to take place. But he wants them to have the promise of knowing that obedient children will always be productive. Did you notice way back here in the first part where we read, said, I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I've been doing, and even greater things than these. Greater things than these? He fed 5,000 one time, 3,000 other, and those were just men. I didn't count the dogs and the kids. He healed the blind. He raised the crippled. He did all these things, and he says, he's sitting there talking to them, and I don't know about you, but my understanding is that this book is for our benefit as much as it was for theirs. And it says, and you'll do even greater things than these. We don't have any record when he preached and they had 3,000 conversions in one day. Or another day when he preached and they had 5,000 people there. They all came to eat. I'm sure part of them were Baptists. But he says, greater things than these will you do. Did you know that right now the gospel is being responded to around the world? That's one of the things that we can really get excited about. There's one baptized every minute in China, every day. They tell us that they're believing there in groups of 30,000 people a day. Do you know how long it would take for all of the in excess of 1 billion people in China to be baptized? If you could baptize or count them one every second, it would take 137 years. Our task looks great, but we have a promise. Jesus has said, the things that I have done, you will do also. Did you know that in the Near East that they hardly have any Bibles in the language of the people? There are so many different dialects and languages. You know what's happening over there? God's working with dreams. A young man, the oldest son in the family, spent the last 3 days of his father's existence here on this earth, hoping that his father would wake up and the son could tell him the last time how much he loved his dad and how much he had appreciated him and what he had done for him. But his dad never did wake up before he passed away. And the fascinating thing is, the young man went home that night. Next morning when he had a dream that night. He got up the next morning, went down to breakfast, and everybody was there except one sister, the youngest sister. He asked about her. They said she hadn't come down from her bedroom yet. I don't know what's wrong with her. He goes up and knocks on the door, and she tells him to come in, and he can tell she's been crying, and he said, "What's the matter?" She said, "I had nothing," like the average 16-year-old girl would say. "Nothing wrong. I'm just crying to see my beautiful tears float." He said, "Tell me what's bothering you." She said, "I had a dream last night." Would you dare believe she then recounts the dream she had, and it's identical to the dream that he had. And the dream that he had was that his father came back and told him, said, "Son, I knew you were with me. I'm sorry I could not speak to you, but would you believe that Jesus appeared to me in my dream and told me, I am the one that you have sought all your life. And I have come to tell you that I'm going to take you with me. And you will be with me forever. He said, son, I was so enthralled by it. He said, oh, all 3 of those days, they were so wonderful. And he spent with me and talked with me. He says, now you go home and tell your brothers and sisters they're Muslims. The kinfolks would be in charge of killing them if they accepted the Lord. But the son and the youngest daughter went down and they told the story, the dream that both of them had. And guess what? The whole crowd accepted the Lord as their precious Savior. God is working in mysterious ways. When he said the promise that I'm going to go with you, and not only the things have I done and that you've seen and witnessed, you will be doing things like that or similar to that, and some even greater. Now that was in the Near East, that story was, but in the Far East, God's not doing any dreams. You know why? Excuse me. In that area of the world, he's not doing dreams, he's using healings. That's in the Near East. And every service, when the gospel is preached, there are 2 invitations. One is that you accept Jesus Christ as Savior. The second is, those of you who want healing, come over here and we'll pray for you. And brother and I was privileged to see that take place among Kekchis. They had no Christian background. Yes, they belonged to the existing church there, but they didn't know anything about a personal God. They all had their own idols in their houses that they really believed in. But whenever they found out that their God was a healing God, it was not at all unusual. Whenever the pastor started to give an invitation, the people would already begin to come down and stand and say, Pastor, pray for this, Pastor, pray for this, Pastor, pray for this. And God is calling people to salvation through not only through dreams, but through the healings that are taking place. To see that there is a dynamic, real God who is alive, who loves them, and has the power and desires to save them so that they might be with him in glory forever. My brethren, promises that we read in this book, they will come true. I'm not saying that each of us will have all the same experiences, but that's something it says, why is that? Verse 13 says, so that they may know him, so that his name is glorified. We must remember that God moves in such a way that his name and only his name is glorified. We can rejoice in being a part of telling the story and should joy in the experiences, but always we need to know that the primary object is our God who knows us and loves us, and he wants the glory that he should receive whenever a person is saved. And God's obedient children also, they'll have complete assistance. In verse 16, he said, another helper, that he may be with you forever. That word means another helper just like I. Can you imagine that? Did you remember what we read on the other part of the saying? He said, we're in Jesus, and Jesus is in God. It's like one box is inside of another box, which is another box. What that means is, my brethren, that we have access in our lives as God's children to all of his wisdom and power and knowledge that it requires for him to work his sweet will through our lives as individuals. Does that mean I know everything, that I can do everything? No, not in any wise. But it means that I, as his child, when I give myself to him to be used of him so that his name would be honored and glorified, he will supply me with what's necessary to accomplish that task. I testify to the fact when I was called to be a missionary, my first interview with people from the board, I told the man, I said, I don't have any earthly idea I can learn a foreign language. The only thing I spoke was Texas. He looked at me and smiled and he said, we'll think about that later. He never did bring it up again. They sent me to Costa Rica to study Spanish. Guess what? We had 3 trimesters in 1 year. At the end of my second trimester, I became an interim pastor. Can you imagine 6 months of language learning and you're supposed to be preaching and taking care of a congregation? You talk about praying, I found out what that was like. You don't remember it, but there was a man who started to crawl over the Berlin Wall when it first went up, and they shot him. It was during the daytime, and it was hot summertime, and it did not kill him. He was just on the top of that wall. Well, I was going to tell this story, and I got ready to shoot the rifle, and I aimed the rifle, and I forgot the word to shoot. Now, what do you do in a case like that? Well, I just popped in my mouth, and it came out, it sounded like a gunshot. I didn't have to say it. I went back home, and I studied it again, and I remember that word to this day because it was, it nearly got me in trouble. My brethren, guess what? I got to Guatemala. We've got 23 languages, Maya descent languages in Guatemala today, but Spanish is the national language. We studied Spanish. And guess what? There was one area of the country that was really not developed well, and it had 250,000 people living up there who couldn't even hear Spanish, the gospel. Do you think that I'd have ever left Texas if I knew I was going to have to learn Spanish? And it's got enough books to fill this room to tell you how to learn Spanish. They've got lots of teachers. And guess what God told Lahoma and me? Said, you all are supposed to go up there. No grammar. No schools, but there were 2 single Wycliffe missionaries there, ladies, and they taught us 25 lessons in 18 months and said, you know enough now, you can learn it if you really want to know it. And guess what? They were right. Do you think I'd have ever set foot on an airplane in Texas if I knew I was going to have to learn 2 languages, one of which doesn't have any resources of any kind? I'm exaggerating a little bit. There was a man that translated the New Testament, and he had created a dictionary. But you can take a catchy word, and you know what? That man one day, he wrote 3 pages of words that can be the way that stem of that word can be manipulated and used. And it's not hard at all. You learn all the things and you say, oh, I see that, I see that, I see. But when it goes by your ear like a machine gun, and they've added a group of prefixes and a group of suffixes on that stem, you say, there's something about that word kind of sounded familiar. And by that time, there's 40 more words that just went by, and you really don't have time to think about that first one because there's 40 more you're trying to figure out. Guess what? I wouldn't change the experiences the Lord permitted us to have in Guatemala for anything on this earth. We had the dream that there would be 1,000 congregations with an average of 100 every congregation. I made up a little deal to take when we came home, and I passed them out, and other missionaries saw me. I was a Glorietta, and they just died laughing. It said 100,000. Red letters. And they said, Dick, are you going crazy? I said, nope. Dr. Cawthon was president of the Foreign Mission Board at that time. His wife came by, and I gave her one. I told her, I said, Ms. Cawthon, pray with us. We've got an opportunity to see a real people movement to the gospel in Guatemala. She says, oh, thank you so much. I'm going to be praying. Guess what? There's nearly 50,000 Baptists in the north central part of Guatemala today. And I can't help but believe God's going to have 100,000 of them before he knocks me in the head and carries me off. Brethren, the things that I do shall you do also, if we allow him to keep his promise through us for his honor and his glory. Oh, brethren, God expects his obedient children will have all the competent assistance they need for whatever he calls them to do. Another helper, that he may be with you forever. And this helper, do you remember? The last part of Matthew, before he said, go ye, he said, all the power of the heavens and the earth belong to me. And I'm going to be with you. I have access to all that he can trust me with. And the same promise is yours. And if we'll just allow him to use us for his honor and his glory, we will find out what real revival is. It'll be good. It'll be exciting. In the Yucatan area of Mexico, a place called Corralito, there's a fellow that wasn't too good, wasn't too smart, but he found a little old crank Victrola like so, and it had about a half a dozen discs on it, was all it had. But some of them were talked about the gospel. It was biblical. Well, he walked through the woods, all these little settlements and villages, and he'd go and he'd crank that thing, and they'd have a party, and they'd pay him for cranking his thing, his deal. Guess what happened? There was a few people who believed because of what they heard in that Victrola. Now, this fellow said he was a believer, but he didn't give much expression of it other than that. And people believed. Well, he left. And before he left, two men came to him and said, listen, said it's our responsibility to go to the ermita. That means a little building where they keep their image for them. And they had to go and make a sacrifice so that the planting that they were fixing to do would have a good produce, and they would be able to live for another year. It was an important thing. And that idol was known to have great, great powers. And they said, well, now we have accepted Jesus. Should we go up there? If we don't go, our whole community is going to be looking at us, and if the crops aren't good, there's no telling what they'll do to us because we didn't make the sacrifice on the day like we were supposed to. And the fellow that cranked the Victrola, he didn't know what to tell him. He said, well, said, I'll tell you what, he said, this will just be one more time you'll do it. You'll never do it again. Said, but I don't think anything bad will happen to you. You just go ahead and make that sacrifice if you want to. And they said, well, okay. So they went up there. One of them stood at the back door and he said, I'm watching, nobody's coming to see us. And the other guy took his machete and cut off a part of the toenail of that image. He was shaking off how he would do it. He didn't know he was going to drop dead or not. And he stood there a minute and he told the other guy, he said, listen, I cut it off. He didn't do anything. And the fellow says, try something up around his head. So he trims a little off of the ear. And he said, ha, it didn't do anything again. This thing doesn't have any power. And guess what? Within a year's time, the whole valley of Corralito was filled with evangelical believers because of the fact that their God did something greater than his children thought he ever could. My brethren, we need to have complete assistance, and we need to claim that, because you see, God's children will be held to account for it, for our lives. Verse 21 says, he who has my commandments and keeps them, he's the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him. That sounds like there's going to be an accounting, doesn't it? Verse 23, he says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word and go into all of the world. Now then, we're talking about keeping his word. We're at a time of year we're talking about missions, about offerings. Everybody's knocking on the door. You put your mailbox full every day of this children's ranch and that children's ranch and this hospital and that hospital, and then you come to church and guess what? The preacher says we've got 3,765 missionaries that have the bad habit of eating most every day. Said we need some money. We sent them over there. We need to give them something to work with. What are we all going to do about it? Well, the mama bear usually asks Papa what he wants to do. He said, let me think about it. She goes to Lawton, Oklahoma City, Wichita Falls, and finally she's got everything on the list. One of the delights in having little children is the fact that you have little expenses at Christmas time. They don't know how to ask for things that cost $100 to $200 to $300. Did you use all the credit cards? No, honey, but I nearly did. And then she asked, what are we going to give to the mission offering? Oh, I don't know. Why don't you, well, $25 would be all right. $25. Now That's what a family of three can eat for outside of the house, if they're lucky. After the downturn of the economy in 2008, 2 years later in 2010, when it started on the upward swing again, the U.S. public increased the purchases of recreational items 500%. 500%. One of our Christian people who work in the area of finance and writes about it says they receive 150 telephone calls every day. That's the average. And he said that ironically, the believers who call are indebted 1/3 more than non-believers. And he says, we don't know why, except for the fact we feel like, they kind of feel like the Lord is their cushion. And he's going to help them figure that out, how they can get out of that mess. Now then, in that same year that the sale of recreational devices went up 500%, how much do you think increased in church budgets, money given? 4%. So what he tells us, the fellow that studies this kind of thing, he said what he feels like is the fact that we feel like that we never do determine what is enough. We have starter houses nowadays. When I grew up, we just had a house. Now we have starter houses. At about 40, that's the time really now then that you can build one like you like. What that means is you can take on double the indebtedness, not just what you had. Everybody needs a $500 shotgun. $300 boots sure look good, don't they? $600 glasses. And a $20 bill for Jesus on the weekend. The Pocono Baptist Church has been used of God in the last 45 years. They started out, their building was burned down, their lives were threatened. Now then they have a church building there that will seat 6,000 people. Now that's kick cheese. They couldn't get us in there. We need too much space. That church has mothered 41 other congregations. That's the attitude of kick cheese. It was a local church who sent out Paul and Barnabas first time. And so whenever we had the privilege starting out with a clean sheet, they didn't know how to do church. They knew how to gather up a crowd, but they didn't know how to church. And so the teaching process of discipline was a fact that churches have children. What's the average mature adult think about whenever their kids get married? Grandkids. You can spoil them all you want to, and you can send them home. Besides that, they're sweet little critters. And so the Kikchi brethren, they didn't know about missions, this, that, and other. I asked them the question one day. I said, brother, I said, what do you all expect whenever your kids get married? What do you expect? They guessed everything under the sun. I said, you don't think about grandkids? Oh, yes, brother. Did you know some of the grandkids there, whenever the grandma and grandpa are left by themselves in the house, that it's not at all unusual for a grandchild to go live with grandmother and granddaddy, just so they won't be alone, because they need somebody to love. That's the reason that church has grown the way it has. Because the pastor, for example, it came one year, you see, they take up an offering every year for their mission program. And the pastor was talking to a colleague, and he told him, he said, brother, he said, we were kind of tight on money this year. Now, Christmas time down there comes at a good time, because you see the coffee harvest has just finished in our area. So some folks have some coins they can rub together in their pocket. And so it's a time you take up an offering. He said, brother, we're kind of tight on money this year. Normally, every year at Christmas time, said we all get a new pair of shoes. He said, but brother, this year, he said, we talked about it. He said, all the kids agreed. Said, we're not going to get shoes this year. Said, we don't wear shoes the biggest part of the time anyway. Why would we want them so bad? He said, we're going to take that money, and that's going to be our mission offering. Our very first pastor in Coban passed away, left his wife with 2 cows. She made her living by getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and making tortillas to walk around town and sell them door to door. Then in the afternoon, she hauled water and firewood and corn so that she could make them for the next day. She told the church in Coban, she said, Pastor, I want you and the deacons to come get one of my cows and kill it. And said, that's going to be my Christmas offering this year. She lived on a dirt floor. She didn't have running water. She didn't have electric lights. They were all accessible to her if she'd had the money to buy it with. With a cow, she could have bought all 3 of those things. But she said, no, I'm going to give the price of that cow to my Christmas offering. Brethren, we're not going to live forever. I know you're going to have bills for the kids' college, and then when they get married, you wouldn't believe how much you can spend there. And not only that, you've got a retirement you've got to think about. And these are the things you want to do in retirement. And so I don't care what you put in the bank, it's never enough. We need to come to the place where we decide how much is enough. And then as we automatically get a raise, then as we automatically proceed in our life here and God blesses us, when we get the money, what's the first thing in our minds? Praise your holy name, Lord. I can make this kind of an offering for missions. No. We need to start giving to missions in obedience and not by calculation. How long has it been since you've gotten on your knees and said, God, you know what's coming up, and Lord, I don't know how it's going to happen, but we don't have the money, but we want to give. Lord, what do you want us to do? You better not ask if you don't want to know. And when he tells you, is a reaction. Guess what? That's the time to thank him for the miracle he's going to work, and you will see that it'll come to an end. It will be there for it. I testify. There was a time whenever we did well to eat. I was in seminary. I was working in a grocery store. My wife was very creative. She used to make these most beautiful candles you ever laid eyes on, all kinds. I asked my boss, I said, boss, he was a Baptist deacon. I was glad for that. He said, I told him, I said, there's just not any way in the world we're going to be able to have a lot of moon offering this year. Said, do you think I could put on that end cap? I could put some of the homeless candles and we could sell them here in the store? I said, I know it's probably against the rules. I said, I know it won't go through the registers or anything else, and I don't want to create any problem for you, but is there any way we could do that? Bring them on, he said. Sold every one of them. $5, $10, $15. Man, it made my head swim. We were in a pretty affluent area of town, so they sold well. And we had a lot of good Christmas offerings. And we had been able to save $5 whole that we were going to eat out on Christmas Day because my wife was already 2 weeks past delivery date. She couldn't even get out of a chair. She sat on the arms of them. She didn't gain but 45 pounds. Brethren, if we want to be obedient, God will work through us for his honor and his glory, and you cannot imagine the joy that it gives to you. You just cannot imagine how God will facilitate your finances to the extent that you'll be able to make a respectable offering to God's work, in addition to your tithe. Brethren, do you know that, can we see that slide? Oh, there it is, right there. Did you know what it say, for example, how our money works as Southern Baptists? In 1847, the Southern Baptist Convention was formed. One of the purposes stated was to do common work as missionary, a missionary work. But we had the society system at that time. That meant that every single school Baptist owned, every hospital, every entity, they had to get out and scrape up their own money. So somebody would come to First Baptist Church Duncan on one Sunday after payday, and he was a good communicator, and boy, he would carry off a good offering. And then next week you don't get paid because you have 15 days. Well, the next week, here comes some old boy. He's from some other school or a hospital, and his needs are just as great, and he makes a good speech, but there's just not any money left in the pockets. So finally, in 1925, 77 years later, the cooperative program was created. And you see, whenever the cooperative program is just exactly what it says. Let's suppose you put a $100 bill in offering today. 10% of that goes to the cooperative program. That means tomorrow it'll be sent to Oklahoma City. And in Oklahoma City, they will retain 57% of that because we have the program here in Oklahoma City, all sorts of programs that we support. If we need help, we call Oklahoma City, and they'll probably have somebody that's a specialist in that, and they can help take care of it. Besides that, we have some mission work in it also. But then 37% of that is sent then to Southern Baptist causes through the corporate program. And it would be $4.30 would go to the cooperative program throughout the entire convention. And that $4.30 will be used. It came from the cooperative program, and then the Lottie Moon Christmas offering is used for 59% to make up the budget of the International Mission Board. Now then, that money that goes to Nashville, excuse me, the International Mission Board gets 50% of it. The other 50% is for seminaries and for the Religious Ethics Committee and also the board expenses. But that's how much. So if you gave $100 today, probably you, out of your money, only $2.15 would go to missions because we got 50% of it at the International Mission Board. Now, I've said all that to say this. You can put a $100 check in the offering, and it's really not something great. Did you know what the average income, what the median income in the United States today is? It's $59,000. Median income, that means median means that half of the population makes more and half of the population makes less. It's not the average. $59,000. That's over $1,000 a week. If you'd have told me when I was a kid that there'd be a day that the median income would be over $1,000 a week, I'd told them you need to have some psychological help. Psychiatrist. Brethren, what I'm trying to say is God calls us, and He calls us to be responsible for the opportunities that He gives us. Now, in contrast to the cooperative program, and I'm just going to shut down here in just a second, we had a fellow here by the name of Larry Jones in Oklahoma, good Oklahoma boy. Do you know what his income was? It averaged $1 billion a year. That's with a B. And when things got bad and his son wanted something to do, he gave him $250,000, $250,000 for some business enterprise that went flat. But Daddy said, don't worry about it, you don't have to pay it back. My brethren, there will be a day of accounting as God provides for us. He expects us to use this under His direction. And there are people around the world who are waiting to hear the gospel itself. Dr. Albert Mohler has made the statement, evangelical Christians give a higher percentage of their income to world missions during the Great Depression than they do today. The average Baptist church in 1927 was 11.7%, and today it's less than 10%. Are we serious about the sacrifice that God made when He limited Himself to the human experience? I wish I had time to tell you some more stories, but you pretty well got tired already. But what I want you to know is, only trust me, won't get it done. That won't get it done. And we're going to have to answer for our actions and what we call our love for the Lord. We stand and sing so easily how much we love, how much we adore, how much we glorify God. But you see, there are three things that we need to be involved in. We need to pray. I'm not talking about this prayer that says, oh, Lord, bless all of our missionaries wherever they are in the world today. I know things are tough for them, but you get them through the day. Amen. God go. We need to pray, and we need to pay financially as God's program set up for us. And then we need to persevere. Did you know that if you don't have time to pray for your pastor and staff, you're not going to pray for missionaries? If you don't have time to pray for pray and go, you won't have any influence on missionaries. Do you know one of the reasons why so many Kikchis are believers today? It's because there's been a large cadre of people who believe in prayer. We need to pray, we need to pay, and we need to persevere right here. The more excited you go, the more excited you become about being used of God at this point in our place, then you'll become a serious prayer. You can't pray at all at one time. You have to make you up a schedule. Monday is this, Tuesday is this, Wednesday is this, Thursday is this. In just a moment, we're going to have an invitation. The pastor's going to be here at the front. But my challenge to you this morning is this one thing. If you would be willing to ask God, Lord, what do you want? I want to make you happy. I want to give you exactly what you want this year financially for missions. If you'll make that prayer, I want you to come and shake your pastor's hand and say, Pastor, I'm going to pray for that. And not only that, I'm going to be a prayer warrior in the future and not just a prayer when things get bad and tough. Precious Lord, we thank you today for your very being. We thank you for your love and your watch care, your provision for us, your grace and your mercy daily that you just shower upon us. And Father, we know that we have a task before us. 7+ million people on this earth. And Lord, we cannot imagine what you can do. It's just beyond, it defies our imagination. But Lord, whatever it is, we want to be part of it. Lord, speak to us today. Speak to us, Lord. Help us that we can respond in faith, knowing that when you ask us to do or to be something, that you make it possible for us. Help us to believe it and act on it. For we ask it in your holy name. Amen. Would you stand as we sing together? If you'll make that promise to the Lord today, I want you to do it publicly. It kind of helps cement it, and it'll thrill your pastor to death. If you'll be willing to get on your knees and say, God, whatever you want, that's what we're going to do. It'll be scary.